Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Powell. Welcome back to the Banking Committee. I look forward to your testimony. About a year ago, the U.S. economy was entering an unprecedented economic contraction as a result of the shutdowns that followed the spread of COVID-19. We all remember credit markets seizing up. Second quarter GDP last year fell by over 30%. Unemployment rate reached about 15% in April, the highest it had been since the 1930s. The economy was in very desperate straits, to say the least. Thankfully, the worries about a long, drawn-out depression appear to have been unfounded. In response to the economic collapse, Congress and the Fed took very, very bold, unprecedented, and decisive action. The Fed quickly lowered interest rates, launched a quantitative easing program on unprecedented scale, and helped facilitate market functioning through a variety of emergency programs that were funded through congressional legislation. And we in Congress passed over $4 trillion in relief over 5 overwhelmingly bipartisan bills. Fortunately, today, we are in nothing like the situation we were in last spring. Today, the unemployment rate is now 6.3%, about where it was in July of 2014. 18 states have unemployment rates below 5%. The average household in America is in a better financial position today than it was in before the pandemic. Personal savings rates are up by over $1.6 trillion. Consumer credit is down by over $100 billion. There's no question there are some subsets of our economy and our society that have been hit much harder than others. But in the aggregate, the fact is Americans have more disposable income now than they had before the crisis. And yet, Congress is in deliberations to spend another $1.9 trillion with universal payments to people who've never had as much income as they do, to entities that have, such as state and local governments, which in the aggregate have taken in more revenue in 2020 than they did ever before. We are well past the point where our economy is collapsing. And in fact, our economy is growing very powerfully. The last thing we need is a massive multi-trillion-dollar universal spending bill. And we should recognize that all of this spending comes at a cost. It all gets funded with government debt, which is either monetized, which has its own dangers, or it's a burden that gets passed on to future generations that have to service that debt. In 2020, debt held by the public reached 100% of our total economic output, and CBO projects that over the next 10 years, net interest costs will amount to $4.5 trillion, and that's without another $1.9 trillion bill. There's also a real danger that we have overheating in places that lead to unwanted inflation, and I think the data is increasingly pointing in that direction. Keep in mind, we have $11 trillion in personal saving deposits. The country is in an accelerating reopening as the number of COVID cases is declining very, very rapidly on a daily basis. The economy is poised for very substantial growth in the near term, and yet the Fed continues to purchase $120 billion of securities per month, maintain short-term interest rates at basically zero, and Congress is considering, as I said, another enormous bill. And another matter, I want to make the point that I do think it's very important for the Fed to continue focused on the mandate it has and not to seek to broaden that mandate. As noble as the goals might be, issues such as climate change and racial inequality are simply not the purview of our central bank. So during this hearing, I look forward to hearing about your views, Mr. Chairman, on the economy, on monetary policy, and the state of our markets. And with that, I yield.